Did you notice that we had a noticeable drop in traffic yesterday?
I didn't, because I was out of the office yesterday, so that's my excuse.
That's probably why it dropped. It was just that one unique missing.
Well, I did have to stop my script that just constantly hits our site to bump our numbers.
That reminds me of a nice other episode. I was working on a project once, and this was sort of an agency sort of setup, and we were working on an app and starting to launch it, and they sent around an email. People in the office, please make sure that you disable, tracking, so your traffic isn't part of the traffic that we record, the uniques and stuff. And I thought, folks, if you need to filter out the 15 people you have in the office, then your traffic is not worth tracking.
Yes. Well, no, I didn't. So the short answer to your question is no, I didn't notice that we got a dip in traffic.
Can you imagine why that is? That we had a drop yesterday?
It wasn't the bank holiday. It was a very belated April Fool's joke. I don't know.
I'm pretty sure it was the eclipse, because it's the US traffic that dropped off significantly.
Oh, everyone was outside.
Yeah, they were all
looking at the sun
gazing.
Right, yeah, and because there was only a few places here that could just see the tail end of it, right?
Oh, right. Oh, did it hit the UK? Because it certainly didn't hit mainland Europe.
I think it hits the top corner of Scotland, and then I think in the band where I was, it was supposedly visible for about 30 seconds or something like that. But yes, that makes sense. And how much of a percentage drop was it?
I did. Well, you see the bump. It's noticeable. I think in the US traffic, it might have been, don't quote me, maybe even 50%. I mean, it looked like a weekend effectively. And that's a weekend is
right.
Typically 50% down. And that double check, like India had a higher day than normal on Monday yesterday. So it was clearly, and India is the second highest source of traffic, interestingly. Just barely behind the US.
Well, so luckily it doesn't happen again for it's like another 30 years or something.
I think there's certainly other ones happening. I just don't know where. I think Australia is next at some point. They're quite frequent. You should ask ChatGPT, and it'll give you a confident answer. At least it'll be confident.
Well, okay. Well, I'm glad it's recovered today at least.
We also have some follow-up from our previous recording, and this is from Mr. Anonymous, a person who's been really frequent in their follow-up, and I really enjoy that. I really love getting the follow-up, so that we can at least in hindsight make sure that what we talk about is more correct than the first time around.
So anonymous, in fact, that I don't even know who it is.
And last time we talked about this project, this package to measure the code size in packages. And the idea was to get a feel for how much your app or library will grow if you use a certain package in your app or library as a dependency. And we were discussing, could this be an opt-in mechanism and so on. And this anonymous person said, actually, that won't make a lot of sense because Swift packages are statically linked and dead code stripped. So you effectively only pay for what you use pretty much.
Right. Mm-hmm.
If everything works as planned. And I think there's some changes, still ongoing changes. So this isn't quite perfect yet, but it certainly has been improving, and this will certainly, also continue to improve. So it'll always be, if we were to do this kind of thing, I think what we'd be measuring is effectively only the worst case scenario. And that's a very misleading figure then, because if you used everything a package had to offer, that's what you then would pull in. But, no one ever does that. So publishing that metric would be pretty useless.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but it's obvious in hindsight. I think in the JavaScript world, I quite like the name of it. In the JavaScript world, they call it tree shaking, where anything that's not attached to a branch falls out.
Yeah. I should also mention, it's a bit murkier than that, because if you're using inlineable and you have lots of generic functions, it can actually grow, because for each inlineable use of a generic function, you will, generate more code on your end. So it's give and take. It's a really difficult thing to exercise, and it's very specific to your use case. So I think, the message effectively is it's going to be,
we shouldn't do it.
We shouldn't do it. No.
And I think the main thing there is that if you give a piece of information on a package page like that, if it's a glanceable bit of information, it has to be fairly robust. And anything that we could put there that might be misleading is something we should try very hard not to do.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. If it's so specific, I mean, there's really no real value. Because even if you were to use it in different projects of yours, you'd get different results. It's not even. I just don't see a way how we could possibly derive anything useful out of this.
Yeah, it's the end of the feature, unfortunately. But that's okay, because
saves us
these
work.
Things that you think about a feature. Yeah, exactly. That's how it works. Yeah, exactly.
So one thing I wanted to briefly talk about is the issue that popped up, I think it was last week or the week before, certainly after we last recorded, which was 2 weeks ago. And that was yet another supply chain ecosystem thing, and that's the XC package backdoor that happened. And everyone has probably seen this, but just to summarize very briefly, so there was a widely used package XC that's around compression, and it's used in lots of other packages, amongst them SSH and the Linux kernel. And someone managed to sneak in code that can be used as a backdoor into this package. And it was caught just before it was being widely rolled out into all sorts of packages and Linux distributions. So that was a really, really critical thing that happened and was caught at the last minute by chance, effectively. I mean, it's kind of crazy that this didn't turn into an actual backdoor.
There's a couple of really good write-ups of this that we'll put in the show notes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think interesting,
if you haven't kept up with it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's interesting in two aspects. Well, maybe at least two. So one is technical. So I think technically it's interesting how that was actually done, because even when you knew it was happening, it was really hard to detect. I actually looked at one of the pull requests where the disabling of one of the detecting mechanisms was snuck in, and I knew sort of what to look for. I didn't see it. I mean, also I didn't really understand all of the details of it, but there was a extra dot put into the pull request, which is like impossible to see unless you really look at it.
Sure.
I guess it really depends a lot on how you look at pull requests and divs. And if you were to use the normal GitHub mechanism to do that, you probably wouldn't see that extra dot. So that I found that interesting. The other interesting bit was that it really abused the weak spot in how open source software is being maintained. And by that, I mean that it's often sole maintainers that are working on things themselves and are sort of left to deal with everything themselves, and it's quite easy to sort of gain trust, become part of the team, and then inject code that way, because that's the mechanism, right, that was used here. It wasn't someone sneaking a code review past someone, or just solely that. It was also someone being part of the team, and that made it a lot easier to get that past watchful eyes.
Yeah.
And that's tricky.
The other really big one that's worth mentioning there is that a lot of solo maintained open source projects have this other problem, which is that the person who had the original problem and developed some code to fix their original problem, they might not have that problem anymore. And so they gradually kind of drift away from wanting to maintain it at all, because it's not actually a project that they use in their current role. And so this is a real problem. And so when somebody steps up to say, "Oh, I'll help,"
yeah, you're happy, right?
that can, you're very happy, and that can be like, oh, thank everything that somebody is interested enough to help with this, and it can be very tempting just to let it go too easily.
Yeah. And it's sort of, for everyone using that package, it changes under the hood. The trust that they initially had when they picked it as a dependency, you sort of change it under them. It's like as if there's a popular website that gets sold and then, someone else is sort of maintaining it, and suddenly, it's a different mechanism. It's a very different, you don't have the same sort of buy-in to your initial dependency pick that you made. So, I wonder how you could even protect against that. I think that's a really difficult thing to deal with. And money is really only part of it. I'm not even sure if that maintainer was better paid. That would have changed anything of the outcome, right? And that's the typical thing that pops up. I quipped, I guess I wrote on Mastodon, silly idea. How about maintainers were paid $1 per star per month from a fund that big tech companies pay into.
Right. Yeah.
And of course that's silly, right? Because money isn't the only problem, as we've just discussed, and it's obviously also very easy to game that sort of thing. Just have go around accounts starring the thing. But I thought it was interesting to look at that as well, because in some cases I think it might help if people were able to make it their job to maintain open source, which in many cases it can't be, right? It's an evening thing, it's a weekend thing, it's a side thing, and that makes it harder for people to actually stay vigilant and stay, in quotes, on the job, which isn't actually their job.
I think, and it's something, it's a metric we use in the package index scoring calculation, and the metric we have is how many contributors does a package have, and we give a number of points on various thresholds of kind of 1, or I think there's 1 for 2, and then more than 5, and then more than 10, or something like that. And there's diminishing returns, but having that indicator of there is more than one person invested in this is important. But what that doesn't capture is a situation like this, because while the social engineering attack, I wouldn't call it sophisticated, it was certainly a social engineering attack that was long term. Because I believe that the person had been a maintainer on the package for, I think, was it 2 years? Before actually deploying the bug. And so we would happily mark that as a package with 2 contributors, because this person had been making useful and legitimate commits to the project for a significant amount of time.
Yeah, and on the other hand, this is a case where we see it, right? It's actually quite interesting that in open source you can see both the thing happening and the history of it happening.
Yes.
It's also quite easy to think about, well, how many times don't we see it, right? Because it's not been found. No one ran a performance test to find a 0.5 second regression and followed up on it.
I predict this is not the end of this story.
No, I mean, it's if you look at it, it's a very appealing. I mean, for someone who wants to do this sort of thing, this is probably how you have the best success ratio of doing it, right? And the other thing is, only in open source do you see it. I mean, an actor like that could just as easily get an employee into a big tech company doing something like that. I wonder what the mechanisms would be there to find that and combat that. But it's certainly feasible, right? Or it's thinkable that might happen.
I hope there are no instances of this in the package index, but it's, of course, it's possible.
But one other reason I brought this up is I have a surprise quiz for you, and I think we actually need sort of no one expects the Spanish Inquisition style of chime for these surprise quizzes that I spring on you.
I'll get my sound library out.
Right.
And, yeah,
excellent. So the quiz question is: how many stars across all of our packages do we have in the package index? And I'll accept answers to the nearest 10.
Nearest 10? I think you were going to say nearest 1,000.
Well, yeah. Well, let's say 20.
Okay, so approximately just under 7,000 packages, probably an average of 10 stars. So let's say 70,000. Let's say 65,000.
Ooh, you're miles off.
I'll come in again.
You're miles off. You are 2.5 orders of magnitude, I think.
Oh dear. Okay.
What was your figure? 65? No, it's 1.5.
It's 1.5 what?
Now it's become a math question.
Oh, 1.5 orders of magnitude.
Yes,
okay.
yeah.
What's the number?
The number is 2,274,276 stars across.
Oh, I got that very, very wrong.
That was. I think it's
so the average must be much higher.
Yeah.
Because I know there are a couple of packages with a lot of stars. Yeah. Which I suppose I should have thought about those, because I think some of them have like 30,000 stars.
Yes, yeah, I think our highest has 25,000
yeah.
or so, yeah. And I think there are quite a number of those, yeah.
Okay.
I think easily, like a handful would already get you 65,000 that you had there.
Right, okay.
I think there's also a long tail of...
Good job, everyone, for clicking on the stars.
Yeah, I think there's a long tail of just stars on repositories in general. I think it's quite easy to get a few hundred, just because they never go down, right? No one unstars repositories, so it's really a continuously growing number on a repository. So yeah, there you go. That's the quiz question.
Well, there we go. I shall find an appropriate chiming sound.
Excellent. Right, another thing we could briefly talk about is an interesting post I saw on the Swift forums in the last week or two, and that's a post calling Haskell from Swift.
I saw this, yeah.
And this is a post by Rodrigo Mesquita, and it's a post about calling Haskell from Swift, as the title says. Another example of Swift in unusual places. So I think it was last time we talked about calling Swift from C#. This time is Haskell. It's really interesting to see these pop up. And it's also using C interop in this case. I think in the C# case, it was C++ interop. Mm-hmm. This time it's C. And codable is used for argument sending. Really interesting. I think Swift is quite interesting and perhaps unique in that it has this strong C interop and effectively allows all of these language integrations to be quite feasible. Post is a very interesting read, if only to see what Haskell actually looks like, because it's quite a different beast. I've never used Haskell. I'm sort of aware of it, a functional language, and it's quite alien to read. You look at a couple of constructs that are quite difficult to decipher, and without comments and annotation, you probably wouldn't know what's going on.
I took a quick look at Haskell many years ago, and it passed me by, that language.
Yeah, I did see a peek and a poke there in the example, which was really nice. Threw me back to the C64 days, where these were things you would do. The other thing I found interesting, it's using macros on both the Swift and the Haskell side, Haskell's equivalent of macros, to deal with the bureaucracy of this interop. Because again, here also there's a bit of setup that has to be done to marshal and unmarshal the arguments that are being passed through, and getting all the calling set up, which is using C and unsafe buffers and all that stuff. So there's a bit of bureaucracy that needs to happen to get this going, and macros can deal with this, which is really nice. And I think that's also something that wouldn't have been possible that easily and in a actual library. So this comes with a library that makes it then easier to do this interop. So that's quite nice, and I wanted to give this a shout out.
Right.
And I think just worth mentioning that I think the goal pretty much to use this is to use SwiftUI, the UI layer in Swift, and then call out to a Haskell library. I think that's
sure.
Again, as in the C# case, the interest is to use the rich UI libraries on Apple platforms and use the backend in other languages. So quite nice.
Absolutely. And in not cross-language but cross-platform news, I noticed something so we have this nightly job that looks at every package in the index and the dependencies that package has, and it uses those dependencies to discover packages that we have yet to add to the index. And I noticed, I think on last night's nightly job, that there was a big expansion of packages from the browser company, who are the people who have been doing a lot of work on Swift on Windows for their Arc browser that's now in beta on Windows. And I think before there was only one package that interfaced with the Windows runtime, and there's not enough information in the README files for me to be confident about this, but my guess is that this is a splitting of responsibilities, because there are now packages for Swift UWP, which is UWP is Universal Windows Programming, maybe? Universal Windows Platform. Universal Windows Platform. There we go.
Nice.
And there's one for the C Windows runtime, and there's one for the WebDriver, which is for doing kind of Appium and Win app driver endpoints. And then there's the Windows SDK, which I think was the old WinRT one. And so I have a feeling there's just a separation rather than anything kind of momentous happening here. But if that's not the case, then please fill us in, because we'd love to talk about it if there's more work going on there.
Yeah, that's interesting. Right. I've got one more, and that is an app called Proposal Monitor, and that's by Victor Martins. Also via the Swift forums, it was announced there, and it's a nice little app that runs on the iPad, the iPhone, where you can follow Swift evolution proposals. It's a bit of a sort of like a Kanban board where you can see what's in review, what's been accepted, what's been implemented, and so on. It has different columns, and you can click through and see the proposals. And that's quite nice. I know there's something on swift.org, but I suspect I might use this more.
I was just about to say, there is a page on swift.org which also tracks this, and has kind of filters and various things that you can search the list and things like that, and it is dynamically updated from the website. So it is always the proposals website, so it's always up to date on swift.org. But of course, what that doesn't do is it doesn't give you notifications or anything like that, or arrange them in a Kanban board.
Right.
So
Nice. Is that data available in an API or in a JSON feed or something? Is that where Victor is getting?
Yes, there is a JSON.
Oh, okay, yeah.
There is a JSON file that it works off, yes. I should know where that JSON file is. It's in one of the repositories. It's in a repository somewhere.
Right. Excellent. Well, that solves it then.
Just start at the beginning of GitHub, and I'm sure you'll find it eventually.
It's somewhere. It currently doesn't have a macOS app, but apparently that's soon to follow, as Victor has announced in the thread. And there you go, Proposal Monitor, give it a look.
I wonder if this app is using that JSON file, because it's not hidden. It is an open JSON file, so it could be.
I would imagine so. That's why I was asking, because I wouldn't imagine he's scraping the website or anything. I mean, nothing wrong if he did it, but I think it's going to be much easier to ingest a JSON file.
The last thing we should talk about, just in kind of news and project stuff, is some of the work that we've been doing. We've talked about this a little bit in the past. We're doing some work on Swift 6 compatibility this year, because as you may hopefully know by now, Swift 6 is coming, and Swift 6 has some breaking changes around concurrency. And I'm not going to go into all those here, because we've talked about that before, and there's lots of places you can read about that. What we're doing is we're going to be testing. In fact, we have already started testing for package compatibility with Swift 6 on a regular basis, so that we can plot how many packages and how many errors that we're finding in Swift packages over time from now until the release of Swift 6. And we've now done a couple of runs of compatibility builds, initially only over the Swift Package Manager builds rather than the Xcode builds, but I believe our next set of builds will include Xcode 2. And we've also started to think about the charting process and what we're going to present on the page. And so we're going to have a couple of charts on the page as well as some other information. But those charts are going to show both the overall progress of all packages towards Swift 6 compatibility, but also some selected kind of filtered sets of packages, like packages that have been updated in the last X months or whatever like that, so that you get a sense of how this kind of progress towards compatibility is going basically. And part of that is the Swift team are doing a load of kind of outreach work at the moment to, you may have seen them on the forums and all over the place, to make sure people are aware of what's happening and able to get good actionable information about what to do about the Swift concurrency changes that are coming. So part of that is that on our next podcast episode, we will have a guest, which is Holly Baller from the Swift team at Apple, and she's going to come on and talk about this.
Yeah, that's great. I hope we'll learn a lot about how Swift concurrency is going, and what the steps are. I think that there's a lot of concern in the community around what Swift 6 is going to bring, and I hope the page itself and Holly talking to us next time is going to help calm people's nerves a bit, because it's not as frightening as people think it's going to be.
Well, that's maybe your plan for the session. My plan is I have a slightly ulterior motive to what we're going to do on the podcast, which is I think what we should do is bring our 500 and something errors and just go through them one by one. And Holly can tell us all how to fix them, and everybody will learn from that.
Excellent. Well, let's see how that goes then.
Is that not going to work? No. Okay. No, it'll be a very interesting interview with Holly, and I'm sure you'll all be excited to hear it.
Exactly. All right, shall we do some packages?
Yes, let's do some packages. I can kick us off this week, and my first package is called WhisperKit. The company, I think it's made by a company, Argmax, but the primary contributor is Zach Nagengast. And WhisperKit is a package that will take the OpenAI Whisper speech recognition model, which is freely available. Even the models, not only the code, but the model as well, is freely available. And give it to you as a package that you can use to interpret speech or to do speech to text. And there's a couple of reasons to mention this. First of all, this process is incredible. We've actually been using Whisper for probably about a year now to create transcripts of this podcast. So if you enjoy the transcripts, or if you were not aware of the transcripts, they are, every episode has been transcribed by Whisper, and the accuracy is remarkable. Really, it's incredibly high quality. It's not perfect, but it's not far off. Especially if you download the large model, which is one of the models that they make available. The accuracy is really very, very good. We use an application called Whisper. Is it called Whisper, or is it called Mac Whisper? That's right.
Mac Whisper, yeah.
Yep. And that's by Geordie Bruin. And Mac Whisper is a Mac app that also uses the same model and the same code to do this, but it's in the form of a Mac app. And this package by Zach is in the form of a Swift package. And it's worth checking out if you have any kind of speech to text requirement. I would thoroughly recommend that you check out Whisper, and this package might be a good way to interact with it. I think there is also a command line tool for it, so you could use it both as an SDK, but you can also use it as a command line tool if you don't have Mac Whisper or something like that. There are several tools that use this that are out there. And the other thing just to mention here is that all of the processing for the Whisper OpenAI model happens on device. So you're not having to upload your audio into the cloud and wait for a network connection to bring you back the text. This is all happening once you've got the model downloaded. And the model is, I think, quite big. I think it's a couple of gigabytes.
Yeah.
Maybe even a little bit more than that. But once you have that model inside your app, you can transcribe as much audio as you'd like to.
Right, and I'm not sure if you know, but I guess, like, how would the package deal with the model? Is that something you need to invoke and download separately? I mean, it's presumably not shipped with a package, right?
It's not shipped with the package. No, it's not shipped with the package. It's actually, I did read about this in the README file. If you call WhisperKit and give it some text to transcribe and give it a model that it doesn't have, that call to transcribe will download the model. Now, I think probably that's probably not quite the right approach to it, but certainly there are methods in there to download the model so that you can make sure you're ready before actually starting the transcription process.
Nice. Yeah, WhisperKit, Mac Whisper is great. Yeah, I've seen the results. It's quite amazing, quite remarkable how well that works.
Yeah. It's the real world face of AI. This package.
Right. My first pick is called Async Channels by Brian Flourish. And this is an interesting package that's bringing the equivalent of Go's channels to Swift, as the name sort of implies. And as you can imagine, that sort of spawned a discussion about performance in a thread on the Swift forums. And that was also interesting.
Don't tell me you found a half-second delay and realized that there's been
not that kind of a half-second. No, but if there's a different language, different implementation, sort of the first thing people do is check out how does it hold up. And it's a nice collaborative effort there to see, compare the results and make improvements, because they are needed. It's quite a bit slower than the Go original. I'm not sure how much that is due to Go channels just being very well tailored to how Go's async model works, and that might be part of it. What's also, I should mention that I think the differences are up to 10x, in async channel versus Go's channel. So it's quite significant. Quite significant, yeah. I am not 100% sure how reliable the benchmarks themselves are. I think they cover a few things, but I got the sense that there might be more work needed on how to run the benchmarks, and I think they're currently looking at averages, which is, we've discussed this in the past, isn't necessarily the best way, or isn't great in finding actual real-time performance. I'll dig up the past discussion we had, and this came up when we looked at the package benchmark.
Right.
But what's also interesting, there is another implementation of this concept, and that's in the Swift Async Algorithms package by Apple itself. So there's a type called Async Channel, which does effectively the same thing pretty much with a different API. But this has also been benchmarked, and that's slower than this Swift package. So there is certainly room for improvement in that package, in Apple's package. But I guess also in this new implementation, it's quite interesting. And I tried this out a bit. I think the API is quite nice. So if sort of async streams are a bit nebulous to you, which they can be, I think this API is interesting. It's a bit clearer what you're sending and how it's using operators. So it has a couple of tricky bits around that. But if you're sort of new to the concept and want to understand how that works, it's quite interesting to set this up in a playground and play around with it a bit. So that's the package called Async Channels by Brian Flourish.
There we go. And next week we'll be talking about how we can integrate Go code with Swift so that we.
I'm sure that exists. We'll dig that up.
I'm sure it does. It'll again be the C API.
Yeah, exactly.
I would imagine that will lead to that. Yeah. So my next package for today is it's one of those packages. You're going to laugh at me here. That there are some packages that are, like, for example, the one you just talked about, and WhisperKit and things like that, that are big problems that solve fundamental issues that you might have in your application, or that allow you to do things that you would not otherwise be able to do in your application. And some packages solve a very small and very targeted problem, and my next package is one of those. But then I love them just as much because that problem is just something that you're going to have to solve over and over again if you're working with a Mac application. So the package is called Keycodes by Matt Mazzucatti, and this package is effectively, in fact, it even says it in the README file. It says, yes, this is basically a gigantic switch statement. All of the key code constants that if you wanted to detect the key press of like a command plus an H or something like that, you would have to go into the Carbon HI toolbox framework to bring those in. And obviously Carbon's not been around for a long time now, and it really is desperately in need of a better API. And the reason I know this is because in the Mac applications I've worked on, there has always been some kind of half-written set of these just containing the key codes that you need. And what Matt has done is it's a very small package. It's only 2 files of source code, has converted them all to a Swift-like user interface. So that is a small package, but it's going to save you a lot of looking up key codes in documentation. So you get things like .keyboard return is an enum case that maps to the return key on the keyboard. It's lovely.
Yeah, and it gives you autocomplete, right? Because you wouldn't get that in
absolutely.
The other case. Yeah, nice. Yeah, that's the thing. I always wondered why the what's called the symbols, SF symbols, doesn't, it's all stringified, the name, it's all lookup by string effectively.
Yes.
There's no strong typing. I guess it's just too many to stick in an enum. I think I've seen the speculation that that's the reason why there isn't a proper enum interface.
Let me segue this into a third package recommendation because there is a package that I use in every SwiftUI app that I write. Not that that's a huge list, but I've used it in every one that I've written so far, which is called SF Safe Symbols, and it's written by Frederick Peachman. And this is exactly what you think it is. It is all of those symbols and regularly updated. So it always gets updates as soon as the new symbols become available. And that gives you all of the symbols as enum cases, of course, but it also gives you nice helper methods. Like, for example, on image, instead of saying you could image, and I think it's system name, which then takes the string of the constant, you've got image system symbol, which takes the enum, and so you get completion on the enum and all the rest of it. And there are a few everywhere. So I think label has it as well. Everywhere that you would want to specify one of these, there's an extension method there to help you out.
Yeah, it's really it's bizarre. So it seems to work. It doesn't seem to be an issue with the number of enum cases in an enum statement. I wonder why that isn't. It's such an obvious API, right? Why isn't that a proper?
It's a question I don't know the answer to.
It's weird. Maybe anonymous tipster will let us know.
Right, yes.
All right, my second pick this week is the package Ignite by Paul Hudson. And this is a static site generator that offers a SwiftUI-like syntax. And I played around with this a bit, and I really like it. This sort of brings me, like every year in February when my Squarespace bill comes up, I think again about how I should move my site to static gen, have it statically generated and hosted somewhere instead of using Squarespace. And cost really is only a small part of the reason I want to make that switch. Main reason is like version control and the ability to write just straight up Markdown and have that publish. Because right now I have to copy paste stuff into Squarespace editor and all that. And I hate that when there's, you make changes here and there, you lose track of which is which. And it's effectively, I solve this by not posting very much because I don't like working with or updating the site that way. And that's just not a great place to be. And I'd previously looked at John Sundell's publish package to do that sort of thing. In fact, I've even set up a prototype at the time. But I never really pulled the trigger and converted over because you're still sort of writing HTML and CSS in publish. Publish is for someone who knows HTML and CSS well and just wants Swift as a type-safe layer on top of that and use that to write your site, which has its advantages. But also if you already know HTML and CSS well, it's kind of potentially a weird trade-off to make. For me, who doesn't, I know HTML, I can read it, I know CSS, but if you want to write a proper site with all the bells and whistles, just basic knowledge isn't enough. You really need to know more. And that's what I like about Paul's package, because it abstracts away those things that experience you would need to have to make a site what do you call this, adaptable when it shrinks to mobile sizes.
Responsive.
Help me out here, Dave. Responsive, that's it. That's what I was looking for. And or all the accessibility stuff. That sort of stuff you sort of need to know. And if you're not writing HTML and CSS day in, day out, there's a lot of learning you need to do to get that right. Or you would need to use a sort of framework. But if you then use a framework, you might as well perhaps use something like Paul's package here. And I should say what it actually does, and that is it has sort of, if you look at the syntax Paul has created for this site, it really looks a lot like SwiftUI. But the point isn't to replicate SwiftUI and let you write SwiftUI and then have it sort of converted under the hood. What it really does, it gives you sort of elements, web elements that are expressed in Swift UI-like syntax. So you have components. There is no HStack and VStack and sort of stuff like that, because that doesn't map directly to sort of HTML components. At least that's what he doesn't have right now. That's not the pitch he's making. But he has like web controls, like I think there's carousels and accordions, whatever they are called, and menu bars and nav bars and sort of elements that allow you to set up a site in those terms and write that and put in your content. You could also just have straight up Markdown that gets converted over. So just from looking through, it has all the bits that I would need for my site to translate it over. And I might actually give this another stab and actually make the step and convert it over. What are your thoughts on this, Dave? We've discussed this a bit when this package came out, but I'll brace myself and.
So, I kind of wish you hadn't asked me that question. I think what you said about it then was correct, in that there are two types of people in the world. There are people who know HTML and CSS, and there are people who don't. And if you're in that second group, but you do know SwiftUI and you have been working with Swift and creating SwiftUI apps, then, as you said, this framework is going to be a way for you to very easily build up a website. And like you say, it's full of components and all useful things, and that's great. But I think it is just worth knowing what you're getting into with this, though, which is this is a framework that's going to generate you some HTML from your Swift, and what it's not going to be able to do is do the same job that somebody working with HTML and CSS would be able to do in terms of generating like a generic look and feel for a website. So the way that most websites, most HTML and CSS developers work in terms of building a website is you'll have some designs, and this will be the same if you're using Ignite, and then you'll try and map those designs into reusable components. And the way that an HTML and CSS developer would do that would be to write some fairly generic CSS. So first of all, you'd do like a layout, and then you'd start to think about how each element looked and feel, and you'd have generic rules for each element that you put into your CSS code. And then everybody who then writes the HTML, so you've got a team of people writing HTML for a blog or a big site or something like that, they are not concerned about how the thing looks. They're only concerned about writing the HTML. So, and of course, each fundamentally new page might include some more generic classes to go into the HTML, but you're not thinking about styling on every element. And from what I saw of Ignite, it does allow you, just like Swift UI allows you to, it allows you just to style each individual element as you go. And of course, there may be ways within Swift, in fact, I'm sure there are ways within Swift that you might be able to start building on top of that generic styling components that you then apply to your Ignite code. But the way that it's then outputting that HTML is that all the CSS is going not into a generic CSS file, but onto the individual components in your page. And so
right,
that's kind of okay if everybody is all on the same page, everyone's building in the same way. And if you do make these Swift methods to make the styling generic, I'm sure that the end result would be the same. But it's worth knowing the trade-offs that you're making when you take a framework like this. But of course, the alternative is to learn all of HTML and CSS, which is a big job. So it's doing a great job. I'm glad it exists. But it is, if you are familiar with HTML and CSS, something closer to those is potentially going to give you a slightly more efficient rendering out of the end of it.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I hadn't actually looked at the output. I've run it a bit, and I've seen that it brought up a site, but I didn't look at the specifics in the output folder. I guess that would make it harder to tweak CSS after the fact, but in a site generator, I guess that's never something you really want to do because it's going to be overwritten anyway. So
yeah, that's what I'm kind of heading towards at the end there. With if everybody is using this, and if everybody is comfortable with Swift UI, and obviously I'm talking about multiple person sites here. This is, in the case that you were talking about, it's only you that's going to be making this site, so it's fine. Then that could potentially be okay. The only downside to it there is the efficiency of the output code, because you'd be repeating, if you define the styles in Swift, even though the styles in Swift would be reusable, the output would insert the same styling code over and over and over again every time you used it. But we have fast bandwidth, right? So that's not the problem that it used to be.
Yeah, I think, especially for a site like mine, that's going to be trivial. But it's really interesting. It's good to know. I'll dig around a bit more, and maybe I'll even one day convert my site over. But honestly, these days I'm not using it all that much. So this might just be a forever side project. Right, so that's Ignite by Paul Hudson. And I think that's it for this week, isn't it?
It is. So the next episode will be with Holly Baller from Apple, talking about Swift 6. So it will be a slightly different episode in terms of we won't do our normal news and stuff, but we have asked Holly to bring a couple of package recommendations with her. So it'll be interesting to hear what packages she's going to recommend.
Well, see you in...
But until then, we will see you in a few weeks.
See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.